The lecture hall buzzed with anticipation. It was one of those days when the air felt electric but no one knew why, the kind of hum that dances just under the skin before a storm or a surprise. It was 10:54 a.m. at Hamilton University's Department of History, and the 300-seat auditorium was nearly full. Students filed in with laptops open and coffee cups steaming, their chatter rising in waves of light sarcasm and tired enthusiasm. At the front row, sitting alone, was a man no one had noticed enter. He wasn't dressed like a professor or a guest speaker. No polished shoes. No blazer. Just a weathered brown trench coat folded neatly beside him, resting on a chair, and a cane balanced across his lap. His clothes were clean but aged, like they had been folded in the same shape for years and worn without pretense. His hands were folded, resting on the head of his cane. His posture was ramrod straight, despite the years pressed into his joints. The deep lines on his face weren't just age, they were maps of decades few in the room could imagine. He watched the door calmly. Quietly. Like a man waiting for a train he knew would arrive, no matter how late. Near the back, a girl leaned in toward her friend. "Who's that guy?" she whispered. "Dunno. Janitor? Maybe a vet or something," he replied. A guy in a hoodie smirked. "Bet he's here for the free coffee." Laughter spread in low waves. One student even angled his phone toward the man and snapped a photo. Security noticed too. A young campus officer walked down the aisle and stopped near the man, eyes scanning him with suspicion. "Sir," he said, not unkindly, "this section is reserved for faculty and special guests. You'll need to move toward the back." The man didn't flinch. Didn't argue. Didn't speak. He simply looked forward, not with defiance, but with patience. The officer sighed and moved on. He didn't want to escalate it. The man was harmless. Probably lonely. Maybe confused. The clock struck 11 o'clock. A door opened backstage. And the man the students had come to hear, Professor Stephen Whitmore, a Pulitzer-winning historian, walked in quickly, talking into his phone, briefcase in hand. The professor glanced at the stage, then at the front row. And stopped cold. He stared at the older man, eyes wide, voice catching in his throat. He lowered his phone. His jaw worked for a moment like it had forgotten how to form words. Then, slowly, with disbelief melting into reverence, he stepped down the stairs. He didn't speak at first. Just stood before the man, and then, to the shock of every single person in that auditorium, he saluted. The old man nodded slightly, and finally spoke. "Colonel Malcolm Trenton. Reporting is requested, sir." The room went dead silent. Someone dropped a pen. And one of the whispering students leaned back, whispering, "Wait. Colonel Trenton?" Because that name hadn't been heard in public in over 20 years. Professor Stephen Whitmore turned slowly to the crowd, eyes still fixed on the man standing before him. "I can't believe it," he said, his voice low with awe. "It's really you." He turned back to the room. "Everyone," he said, raising his voice, "remain standing. You may not know who this is, but you should." Some students stood awkwardly. Others looked around in confusion. "This man," the professor said, "is Colonel Malcolm Joseph Trenton. United States Army Special Forces. He disappeared from public life in 2006, turned down every interview, every medal ceremony, every honor." He glanced at the man beside him. Colonel Trenton was the commander of Operation Stone Veil during the Balkan conflicts in 1999. When a team of humanitarian workers were captured by a hostile militia, he led an unauthorized rescue mission across 14 miles of enemy territory, with no air support. He and his unit saved all 32 prisoners. 5 of his men died in the process. He carried 3 of them out on his own back. Silence. Thick. Heavy. Reverent. And then, he vanished, the professor continued. Refused medals. Declined public recognition. And for nearly 2 decades, we've only heard whispers. Declassified files. Myths. He turned again to the colonel. You honored my invitation, he said quietly. I didn't think you would. The colonel nodded once. You said the students needed truth. I still believe in that. Finally, the colonel turned toward the auditorium. And he spoke, clearly, firmly. His voice was not loud, but it cut through every breath in the room. You don't need to know my name, he began. But you need to know this: history isn't written by those who speak the loudest. It's written by those who do what must be done, even when no one is watching. He stepped forward. I didn't come here today to relive war stories. I came to remind you that courage isn't cinematic. It's quiet. It doesn't come with applause. It comes in silence. In darkness. When no one will ever know your name, and you do it anyway. People leaned forward in their seats. You will be told that success looks like spotlight. But sometimes, the greatest men you'll ever meet will be the ones holding the door for you, wearing old coats, walking with canes, and carrying memories heavier than metals. The lecture hall was frozen in time. The students, most barely old enough to rent a car, stared in complete silence. Not one phone was out. Not one whisper filled the air. Just the sound of one man standing at the front of a crowd and commanding it without ever raising his voice. And then, someone stood. Near the back, a young man in a ROTC uniform. He rose, straightened, and raised his hand in a crisp, respectful salute. Then another stood. Then another. And soon, every student in that hall was on their feet. Not clapping. Not cheering. Just standing. Because when greatness walks in quietly, the only proper response is silence. Even the young security officer from earlier came forward, removing his cap. I'm so sorry, sir, he said, voice shaking. I didn't know. Colonel Malcolm Trenton nodded with a kind expression. That's all right, he said. That's why I sat quietly. To see if the world still recognizes character without needing a name. He turned to the professor. I've said enough. Professor Whitmore stepped forward. Not nearly. But thank you, Colonel. He turned to the audience. This man taught us more in 10 minutes than I could in 10 years. As Colonel Trenton made his way out, walking slowly but with the grace of someone who had lived through fire, students parted for him. No phones came out. No autographs were asked. They simply watched. And when he reached the door, the same student who had taken a photo earlier whispered, I think we were the ones who didn't belong here. Because true strength doesn't walk in loudly. It walks in quietly, sits alone. And only when the world slows down enough to listen, do we finally hear it speak. As Colonel Malcolm Trenton disappeared beyond the lecture hall doors, the room remained still. A quiet stillness that felt like respect. Like remembrance. Like they had just been in the presence of someone who didn't just live through history, but shaped it. And maybe, just maybe, the world still had room for men like that. Men who didn't seek praise. Who didn't wear their honor on their chest, but carried it in their silence. So the next time you pass someone who looks ordinary, someone who sits alone, someone overlooked, remember, heroes don't always announce themselves. Sometimes, they wait patiently for the world to listen. Delve, if this story touched you, take a moment to hit the like button. It tells us these stories still matter. Speech balloon, and in the comments below, tell us, what part of Colonel Trenton's story stayed with you the most? Pushpin, don't forget to subscribe to the Soul Script, where quiet stories speak the loudest. Because sometimes, the strongest people are the ones we almost walked past.